They thought moving into a quiet lakefront community would be the start of their dream life, until the HOA turned it into a nightmare. One demand led to another, and when they refused to obey, things spiraled fast. Fines piled up, threats escalated, and soon, cops were knocking at their door. But the HOA didn't know one critical thing. The very rule they were trying to enforce could destroy everything they owned. What happens when a simple refusal triggers a battle that exposes secrets no one was prepared for? Stay with me, because this story proves that sometimes the smallest act of defiance can bring an entire empire crashing down. It started like any ordinary relocation story. After years of saving, Daniel and his wife Emily bought a modest lakefront property in a gated community called Silverwood Shores. The houses were beautiful, the scenery stunning, and the promise of peaceful living irresistible. Tucked away from the chaos of city life, Silverwood seemed perfect, or so they thought. In the beginning, life felt blissful. Mornings were filled with quiet sunrises over the lake, weekends spent kayaking, and barbecues with a few friendly neighbors. At first glance, Silverwood Shores looked like paradise. But hidden beneath the manicured lawns and friendly smiles was a shadow most new homeowners never saw until it was too late. The HOA. The Silverwood Homeowners Association, run by a handful of longtime residents, had a reputation whispered quietly around the neighborhood. One woman, in particular, was at the center of every story, Karen Whitfield. As president of the HOA, she ruled with an iron fist disguised as community care. When Daniel first met her, she seemed overly polite, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. She introduced herself, handed him a thick binder of community rules, and welcomed him to the Silverwood family. But tucked between those friendly greetings were subtle warnings. Most people around here do the right thing. I hope you will too. Daniel brushed it off at first. After all, how bad could a few neighborhood rules really be? But slowly he started noticing things. Karen's constant patrols. Notes left on doorsteps about lawn heights. Little whispers when someone failed to comply. It wasn't long before Daniel realized that paradise came with a price. Absolute obedience. And the price for disobedience? That he was about to find out. It began innocently enough. A letter. The HOA informed Daniel that he was required to join and pay a mandatory annual fee for community maintenance. But here's the problem. Daniel's property wasn't technically inside the HOA's jurisdiction. His lakefront cabin sat just outside the boundary line. Daniel politely declined, attaching copies of his deed and property records to prove it. He thought that would be the end of it. He was wrong. Days later, another letter arrived, this one less polite. It warned of potential fines for non-compliance and implied his property could be restricted if he refused. Daniel went straight to the HOA office, determined to clear up the misunderstanding. Karen met him there, leaning back in her chair, arms folded like a queen guarding her throne. Everyone around here contributes, she said. You're no exception. Daniel explained again, calmly, that his land wasn't part of Silverwood Shores' governing documents. But Karen wasn't interested in legal boundaries. To her, authority was the law. Within a week, Daniel started receiving violation notices. First, it was his mailbox height, then the color of his shutters, then accusations about his kayak dock, violating visual standards. None of it made sense, until a neighbor quietly warned him one evening. Karen wants your property. She wants control of that shoreline. She's been after it for years. Suddenly, it all clicked. The HOA's harassment wasn't about rules. It was about power. And it escalated fast. One morning, Daniel woke up to find an orange sticker slapped across his front door. A final warning. The HOA was now threatening daily fines until he voluntarily joined. Soon after, strange cars began parking near his property, always watching. Then came the cops. Karen had filed a complaint, claiming Daniel was violating HOA regulations and creating unsafe conditions for other residents. 2 uniformed officers arrived, confused when Daniel calmly showed them his property deed. They apologized and left, but the message was clear. Karen was willing to weaponize anything, even law enforcement, to bend him to her will. Daniel's frustration boiled into determination. He hired an attorney. That's when he uncovered something explosive. Karen had made a critical mistake. The HOA had recently built a new parking lot for community use, on land they didn't actually own. That land? It belonged to Daniel. And buried deep in county records was proof. Karen had failed to check the updated property lines after a zoning change years earlier. Daniel now held the ultimate weapon, legal control. But he stayed quiet, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The HOA scheduled a mandatory community meeting, demanding Daniel's attendance. He knew this was it, the showdown. The room was packed. Dozens of neighbors sat in folding chairs while Karen stood at the front, towering like a general before battle. She began her speech, painting Daniel as a disruptive outsider who refused to support the community. Murmurs filled the room. When it was Daniel's turn, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He pulled out a thick folder and calmly placed it on the podium. Inside were property records, zoning documents, and legal filings proving one undeniable fact. The parking lot, the lake access gate, and part of the HOA's prized recreation area all sat on land he owned. The room fell silent. Karen froze, her face pale. Daniel's attorney stood beside him and read the official notice. The HOA was trespassing and operating illegally on Daniel's property, and unless they stopped harassing him immediately, he would file a lawsuit that could bankrupt the entire association. Neighbors gasped. Some even cheered quietly. For the first time, Karen had no words. But Daniel wasn't done. He turned to the crowd and explained how Karen had abused her power for years, issuing unlawful fines, bullying homeowners, and threatening families. With every word, more people realized they'd been manipulated all along. By the end of the meeting, Karen's empire had crumbled. Several board members resigned on the spot. Others demanded an emergency vote to remove her as president. Daniel had won, or so it seemed. Daniel chose peace, but not surrender. Rather than suing the HOA into bankruptcy, he struck a deal. In exchange for dropping any legal action, the HOA agreed to recognize his property rights, remove all violations from his record, and reimburse him for every single fine and legal expense. Neighbors, outraged by Karen's years of intimidation, voted her out as HOA president in a landslide. Within weeks, a new, fair-minded board took over, one committed to transparency and respecting property boundaries. Silverwood Shores transformed almost overnight. Without Karen's iron grip, residents stopped living in fear of petty fines. Barbecues returned, neighbors laughed together again, and the tension that had poisoned the community finally dissolved. Karen, meanwhile, disappeared from HOA politics entirely. Some say she moved away. Others whisper she's still nearby, watching the shoreline she once tried to control. For Daniel and Emily, the fight had been exhausting, but worth it. They protected their home, their freedom, and ultimately reshaped the entire neighborhood for the better. And the biggest lesson? Sometimes, standing your ground isn't just about protecting your property. It's about exposing the truth. Now, every time Daniel sits on his porch watching the sun set over the lake, he smiles, knowing the HOA that once tried to destroy him now pays him rent. Because in Silverwood Shores, power no longer belongs to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to the one holding the deeds.